My name is Kathy, and I'm reading this morning from Exodus chapter 16, verses 1 to 16, from the New International Version. The whole Israelite community set out from Elim and came to the desert of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had come out of Egypt. In the desert, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The Israelites said to them, "If only we had died by the Lord's hand in Egypt. There we sat around pots of meat and ate all the food we wanted. But you have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Then the Lord said to Moses, "I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions. On the 6th day they are to prepare what they bring in, and that is to be twice as much as they gather on the other days." So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, "In the evening you will know that it was the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we that you should grumble against us?" Moses also said, "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning, because he has heard your grumbling against him. Who are we? You are not grumbling against us, but against the Lord." Then Moses told Aaron, "Say to the entire Israelite community, 'Come before the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling.'" While Aaron was speaking to the whole Israelite community, they looked toward the desert, and there was the glory of the Lord appearing in the cloud. The Lord said to Moses, "I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Tell them, at twilight you will eat meat, and in the morning you will be filled with bread. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God." That evening, quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is this?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord has commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer, which was about 3 pounds, for each person you have in your tent." And our New Testament reading is from Paul's letter to the church, found in Philippians chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. "Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. And then I will be able to boast on the day of Christ that I did not run or labor in vain." In these readings, we hear God's voice. Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Kathy. "You will know that it was the Lord when he gives you meat to eat in the evening and all the bread you want in the morning." Please pray with me. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be pleasing to you, O God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer of us all. Amen. As people living in the Western world, we have so very much to be grateful for, more than I think we can even fathom. I'm reminded of the wealthy Albertan who was in the habit of giving his dad interesting gifts every Father's Day. One year it was hang gliding lessons, and the year before it was the entire record collection of Willie Nelson's hits, autographed by the man himself. This past year he had outdone himself. He purchased a rare kind of South American bird called the translator. The bird could speak 5 languages and sing Yellow Rose of Texas in any key while standing on one foot. The talented bird cost $10,000, probably American, but he felt it was worth every single penny. This would be the Father's Day gift his dad would never forget. So a week after Father's Day, he called his dad and he said, "Dad, how did you like the bird?" And his dad said, "It was delicious." Even though Thanksgiving is about food, for many Canadians, it's not really a time for culinary adventures, though. Most of us tend to go for the tried and true, turkey and pumpkin pie. And this morning's story, read to us by Kathy, is all about food. But it comes out of the desert wanderings of God's people. The Hebrew people, just for context, are on their long march between Egypt and the land of Canaan. And God gives them a wonderful experience. He delivers them from bondage in Egypt. And they walk through the sea on dry land while Pharaoh's army is swallowed up in water. They celebrate with singing and dancing. We read about it in Exodus 15. But joy quickly turns to complaining. The mob of ex-slaves pitch camps at Marah, where the water is incredibly bitter, so God intervenes and sweetens the bitter waters. And Elim, the next stopping place, is a desert oasis with springs and palm trees and blue skies. Casinos? No, maybe not. It's everything tired walkers in the desert could possibly ask for. But God doesn't let the Hebrews settle for long at the resort like Elim. God makes them move out into the ominous-sounding desert of sin. The sun beats down. There's absolutely no shade to rest in. By this time, water has to be rationed. And worst of all, there is no food. I've been told that an army marches on its stomach. So no food is really bad news. It wasn't long before there were complaints from all corners of the Hebrew camp, and soon a chorus of complaint becomes murmuring throughout the crowd. Where do our leaders, Moses and Aaron, think they're taking us? Look, we were at that wonderful place, Elim. Why couldn't we stay longer? Instead, we had to march out of this God-forsaken desert around and around where there's no shade and there's no water, there's no food. And some began to grumble. Man, remember what it was like in good old Egypt. Remember the meat and the fish and the great veggies they had. Better to die as slaves in Egypt than starve as free people in the desert. Moses and Aaron have brought us out here to starve to death. Boo, hiss, moan. It's only been 1 month, since they'd seen God beat up all the powers of Egypt with the 10 plagues. 1 month. And only a month since the parting of the sea. Just a month since their great deliverance from Egypt. It only takes 1 month for everyone to start the griping and the moaning and the groaning and the grumbling. So God speaks through his servant Moses. Okay, enough with the complaints. Well, maybe not an accurate translation, but you get the idea. What Moses actually said on God's behalf, he has heard your grumblings. 3 times in 3 verses, this short sentence, he has heard your grumblings. Your call is important to us. Please stay on the line. In essence, God says, if you want food, I'll give you food. So the next morning, all around the camp was a heavy dew. And when the dew dried, thin flakes like frost appeared on the desert floor. Manna, they said. Did you know that manna actually means, what is it? Manna sounds like something a kid might say when new food comes to the table. Manna, what is it? Among the Hebrews, the name stuck. Manna. Who knows what manna was really like? Maybe it was something like frosted flakes. The book of Numbers says that when ground into flour and made into cakes, manna tasted like wafers made with honey, or like cakes baked in oil. Maybe they were like manna scones. Whatever it tasted like, manna was God's provision for human hunger. It was sufficient. It was satisfying. Manna was the gracious gift of a good God. I am the bread of life, said Jesus in John chapter 6. Jesus is today's manna. He satisfies our hunger and our thirst. But back to the wilderness. That's where we go as peoples, again and again in everyday life, don't we? So much of our life is lived in one wilderness or desert or another. When God said they were going to have manna, that's what they got. Manna on Sunday, on Monday, on Tuesday, and through the week. There was leftover manna on Friday to last through the Saturday Sabbath so that they wouldn't have to work collecting on the Sabbath. And I suspect they had manna straight and toasted. They had it cooked and sautéed and plain and pilaf and anything they could think of. It's a lot of the same thing. And if it's the same menu every day, you tire of it. And you forget what a wonderful blessing manna really is. Pretty soon the whiners stir up a chorus of complaint again. Who can live on bread alone? Do you remember all the good stuff back in Egypt? What wouldn't we give for some fresh veggies, even if it was broccoli or Brussels sprouts? The book of Numbers records their complaints. Now we have lost our appetite. We never see anything but this manna. So finally, sick and tired of listening, God said again, my rough translation, you want meat? I'll give you meat. You'll get meat till you're sick of it. Enter the quails. Small birds are brought into the camp by the east wind. Which way's the east? That's the east. So by the east wind, and in they come, they fly low, and they roost at night, and they're easy to capture. And in the morning, it's easy to get a basket full of quail. Then back to the tents and whatever the Jewish cooks could make of a basket full of quail, along with the ever-present manna. Quail was good for a while. Apparently, it tastes better than chicken. People praised God for quail, but it wasn't long before some began asking if they couldn't just once in a while have something different. Lamb stew, leftover turkey, or stuffing. But it was just quail, quail, and more quail with manna. And the grumbling started all over again. Why was it that the people of God grumble? Why did they? Why do any of us grumble? Very simply, we grumble because we forget. Grumbling is forgetfulness. The poet Maya Angelou quotes her grandmother who said, "What you're supposed to do when you don't like a thing is change it. If you can't change it, change the way you think about it. Don't complain." Grumbling is forgetting the blessing of life itself. and of life's simple benefits. Grumbling can be a habit, something you do a lot. And we Canadians, oh gosh, we're good at grumbling. What did you grumble about this morning? Was it too cold? Was there dew on your car? Did you really want to go back to sleep? We can make a habit of ignoring or forgetting God's goodness. A man and his teenage son were out on a fishing trip miles from home. They decided to attend Sunday worship at a small rural church, and they walked back to their car after the service. The father was filled with complaints. The service was too long, the sermon was boring, and the singing was off key. Finally, the teenager could stand it no more. Dad, I thought it was pretty darn good for the $1 you put in the collection plate. Paul writes to believers in Philippi, do all things without murmuring, complaining in some translations. Paul uses the same word found in the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the word found in the story of grumbling Hebrews. And it's a word that sounds exactly like what it means, gongusmos. It's like our English word murmur. Doesn't it sound like a lot of grumbling, gongusmos? Grumbling is forgetting. And that goes for our relationship with God, but also for our relationships with one another. Often when I murmur about people close to me, I'm gongusmosing. It's because I'm forgetting the good things in our relationship. I know he always leaves the lid up. But he cooks the most amazing meals. He never closes a door. I bash my head on the cupboard doors all the time. But he's so kind. One reason the stories of the Bible are written down and included for us is to help us to not forget. If grumbling is forgetfulness, then thanksgiving is a response to grace. The Exodus was the gracious act of a good and compassionate God. The Hebrews had not earned God's goodness. They'd forgotten the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob while suffering under Pharaoh. But God remembered the covenant with their ancestors and delivered them from slavery. Out they came. The manna was a gift, so was the quail, both gifts of God's grace. God was graciously providing, but not in the way the Hebrews wanted. You know, God still graciously brings Exodus out of bondage. God still graciously satisfies our hunger, our daily bread, the gospel. God still graciously feeds us with the bread of life, Jesus himself. Grace is something completely unearned, completely unmerited. Thanksgiving today and always is recognizing that we've been given something that was never owed to us. But someone says, I'm a decent sort of a person. I'm a good moral citizen. I believe in God, sort of. I go to church now and again. I put money in the offering. I pray if I think about it. So why shouldn't God recognize my spirituality with showers of blessings? You know, we can be so darned entitled, can't we? God's goodness is never earned. God surprises us, and when we least deserve it, God pours out gracious blessings on us. An entitlement mentality rarely leads to thanksgiving. When we think we've got it coming to us, what's there to be thankful for? And we grumble when we don't receive what we think we deserve. Thankfulness is the opposite of selfishness. The selfish person says, I deserve to be happy. But the thankful soul realizes that life is a gift from God, with all its bumps and bruises and difficulties. Thanksgiving is the response to grace. Thanksgiving humbly acknowledges, God, how good you are to me. Thanksgiving is responding to God's grace even in the midst of trouble. In everything, Paul wrote, give thanks. Perhaps not necessarily for everything in every situation, but give thanks for who God is. And so, to finish up, give thanks even when the quail and the manna are beyond boring. Give thanks because of God's grace, even in the midst of difficulties. Someone once asked me if I live up to my own sermons. Ouch. I tried to be honest and said, well, probably not, but I really do try. And like many of you this week, perhaps, I've counted the incredible blessings of life. But there are times when I take them for granted. There are times when I forget and I relapse into grumbling. There are times when I forget that life itself is a gift of grace. A gift of grace. May we always be thankful. Amen. Would you please pray with me? We have many things to be thankful for, O God. Sometimes we remember them, and other times we forget. When something large or small goes wrong, it fills our minds, and we forget those things for which, when we remember, we are thankful. Help us to remember the good things, gracious God, to name them, to savor them, and to be thankful to you. Amen. Thanks be to God.